Okay, everybody. Originally this video was going to be out yesterday, but I ran into a little technical difficulties, so I'm going to do it now. It's a bit late, so I'll try to do it fast. So, like last week, I'm going to start this preview with the defensive stats. So, Alabama and Clemson's defensive stats. So, Alabama, number one in the nation in defense, total defense. Clemson, number eight in the nation in total defense. And before I go any further, I just like to say that I noticed there was a lot of similarities in these defenses with these stats and seeing how close they were in some cases. But there's one big difference, which is rushing defense, but I'll get into that. But it's been really interesting to see how much Clemson has been more consistent this year compared to last year. So both teams have played 14 games. Alabama has faced 884 plays. Clemson has faced 942, so about 60 more plays. Alabama has only given up 3,416 yards. Clemson has given up 4,296 yards. So it's about 800 more yards on only about 60 or so more plays. Really interesting there. So Clemson has given up a bit more yards. Some may say quality of offense or other things, but we'll see. Alabama has given up 3.86 yards per play. So basically about 3.8, almost 4 yards, while Clemson has given up 4.5 yards per play. Now, to other teams' offenses, Alabama has given up 15 total touchdowns to other teams' offenses, not counting defensive or special teams touchdowns. So 15 touchdowns, while Clemson has given up 29 touchdowns to the other team's offense. So almost double the amount of touchdowns given up to offenses. Alabama's 244 yards per game, Clemson's 306 yards per game. Alabama's leading the nation in forcing 3 and outs, although Clemson's not that far off. They're pretty close to getting a lot of 3 and outs as well. I will say Alabama, though, has 11 defensive touchdowns on the season, while I think Clemson has 2, if I'm not mistaken. I have to look that up a little bit more, but I believe that's the right number. Both teams are forcing a lot of turnovers. Alabama capitalizes on those turnovers more often. Now, when it gets to rushing defense, this is where the biggest disparity is. Alabama's number 1 in the nation in rush defense, while Clemson is number 19 in rushing defense. So if there is any type of weakness, although it's a relative one, when you're ranked number 19 and you're calling it a weakness, to Clemson it would be the run defense. But what you said, like I said, that's a relative weakness. Not so much like, oh, Clemson can't stop the run. It's just like compared to what else. But especially compared to Alabama. Alabama is allowing exactly 2 yards per rush. 2 yards per rush on 434 rushing attempts. Alabama has only given up 868 rushing yards. No matter who you are, that's absolutely amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Exactly 2 yards per rush. 3 rushing TDs allowed all season. Clemson, on the other hand, with the number 19 rush defense, is giving up 3.5 yards per rush. 17 rushing touchdowns given up this season. On 491 rushing attempts, they have given up 1,723 yards. They're basically giving up almost double the amount of rushing yards per game that Alabama is. And that'll be interesting to see how Clemson tries to run for Alabama. I think Alabama has allowed 21 total red zone attempts from other teams' offenses, while Clemson has allowed 36 total red zone attempts. So Clemson has allowed opponents to get into the red zone about 15 more times than Alabama. So what that would suggest to me is that teams kind of drive the ball down the field a little bit more on Clemson than they do Alabama. They tend to get down into the red zone more often, 15 more times. I have to look at a little bit more film to verify, but that would be my conclusion based on those numbers. Now, when it comes to pass defense, Alabama is ranked number 14. And a lot of you don't know this, but Alabama actually has a better pass defense ranking than Clemson. Clemson has number 17 pass defense. And that's not a big difference, and that actually reflects itself in the stats, but just statistically, Alabama's ranked higher. Now, get this. This is really, really similar. Very, very weird how the stat worked out. Alabama has faced 450 pass attempts this season. Clemson has faced 451. 450, 451. Now, the crazy part is the completions when you put them on top of that. Alabama has allowed only 237 completions. Clemson has allowed 238. So basically, what that is that they've faced the same amount of passes and given up the same amount of completions. It's just that Clemson has one more in each number. That's crazy. 237 completions, 238 completions, 450 attempts, 451 attempts. And what that works out to is both teams are forcing their opponents to only complete 52% of their passes. That is stellar pass defense. That is amazing pass defense. Both teams have basically given up about 2,500 yards passing this season, which amounts to about 5.5 yards per attempt. Well, in more specific, 5.66 yards per attempt for Alabama, 5.71 yards per attempt for Clemson. And both teams are giving up about 10 to 11 yards per completion. Now, that may sound bad, but as I said in the Florida video and in the Auburn video a while ago, the way those numbers work is like this. Percentage per attempt / completion are indicative of the percentage. So opponents have to throw the ball basically double the amount of times to get a completion. So if an opponent has thrown 40 passes in a game, they've only completed about 21 or 22 of those passes based on these numbers here. And out of those 18 and 19 incompletions that they have, they've probably thrown interceptions and basically haven't been able to move the ball. 52% of their passes are only completed. That's bad for any quarterback, any team. And so when opponents do complete a ball, out of those 40 pass attempts, they average about 10 to 11 yards, basically a first down. But that number is inflated because all of their completions are coming on a smaller number of completions relative to the number of attempts that they had. So, like I said, all those yards are coming from a smaller number of completions. You can say that the opponents are only able to complete explosive-like passes on these teams, which makes sense based on the film, at least for Alabama. What it would be indicative of is that the secondaries defend the basic routes really well. But then what happens is that the passing yardage comes from receivers making great plays for Alabama. And you can look at the Ole Miss game, or the DBs not playing the ball too well. The DBs can be right there playing good pass defense, playing good man-to-man coverage or whatnot, and just don't turn around and knock the ball down. Don't turn around and put a hand up. And you see that from time to time, especially of Alabama's Marlon Humphrey, who really needs to work on that. Anthony Averett of Alabama does a really great job of doing that. Clemson, I have to look at them some more to check it out. But based on the numbers as well, I would say that they are doing the same thing, where they defend the basic routes really well, but when they do have a completion against them, which is only half the time, same as Alabama, it's probably because the receivers making really good plays or the DBs being undisciplined in how they're playing the ball. But that's a relative weakness when you consider a lot of teams out there giving up 60%, 65%, 70% balls completed. It's crazy. Now, 7% is a big high, but you get what I'm trying to say here. Both of these teams have only allowed 12 touchdowns passing all season. Clemson has intercepted 20 passes. Oh, when I said 2, I think they've only returned 2 of their interceptions for touchdowns. 2 of their interceptions, not 2 total defensive touchdowns all year, 2 interceptions for touchdowns out of 20 intercepted passes. Alabama, on the other hand, has intercepted 16 passes this season and has returned 6 of those interceptions for touchdowns. And they have 11 defensive touchdowns total. Now, here's another disparity. Alabama has given up 11 points per game. Clemson has given up 17 points per game. And what that will come down to, it actually goes back to my numbers when I say Alabama has only 15 total touchdowns that is allowed to the opposing offense, and Clemson has allowed 29. And I said basically Clemson has allowed double the amount of touchdowns that Alabama has allowed. That number reflects here. It's not exact because if it was exact, it would be, Alabama's averaging about 1 touchdown to the opposing teams per game, which would be about 7 points per game. But, that's not counting defensive touchdowns and special teams, field goals and all those points added in. So we add those in, it's 11 points per game, which is close to about the 1 touchdown per game. And Clemson, averaging about 2 touchdowns per game, is allowing 17 points per game, which, including the field goals and defensive touchdowns. And those numbers bear out. Alabama is allowing, on average, one less touchdown per game than Clemson is. So that'll be interesting to bear out. Alabama has 50 sacks on the season. Clemson has 49. So they're really, really close. Both of these defensive lines are disruptive and quick and speedy and strong. Basically, probably the two best fronts in college football at this point. Man, both teams give up. They make opponents work really hard to get third down conversions. They're number 8 and number 7, respectively. Alabama's number 8 in third down conversion percentage, and Clemson's number 7. They both don't give up a lot of first downs, although Alabama has allowed quite a few less than Clemson. First downs total have given up 186 first downs, while Clemson has given up 239. So, what it comes down to is this: Alabama's run defense is better than Clemson's. Clemson's pass defense is not far from Alabama. As a matter of fact, they seem to be on equal grounds in a lot of ways. It depends on how these guys play in the games. Of course, you never know. Alabama tends to capitalize on the turnovers a little bit more than Clemson. Although Clemson does seem to slightly get their opponents to not convert on third downs a little bit better than Alabama. So it was really interesting to see how close this was. But Alabama's run defense is giving them the edge in the defensive stats. And like I said, I'll view Clemson a little bit more to see how it actually plays out with how their actual, defense plays according to these stats. But I'll get back to you on that. Look out for my next video in this series. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about these stats and how that has you feeling for the game. Thanks for paying attention, guys.